Well, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, where we take a deeper look at the 2020 Democratic presidential field. The Democratic primary has more than 20 people running right now, but that doesn't mean Democratic voters have all that many options. In fact, they only have really three options. First, they can choose fire-breathing radicals, people who want an open border with Mexico and open prison doors in our cities.
I've listened to scientists on this, and they're very clear. We don't have more than 10 years to get this right.
We can no longer allow a white nationalist to be in the White House.
The reality is that under my Medicare for All plan, yes, employers are not going to be able to dictate the kind of health care that their employees get.
This has to be the party that's not afraid to say out loud, we're going to tax the hell out of the wealthy.
Or they could choose probably well-meaning but doomed moderates, people who get silence or outright boos when they suggest the Democratic Party confine itself to what might be possible.
Now, in this discussion already tonight, we've talked about taking private health insurance away from union members in the industrial Midwest. We've talked about decriminalizing the border, and we've talked about giving free health care to undocumented workers when so many Americans are struggling to pay for their health care. I, quite frankly, don't think that that is an agenda that we can move forward on and win.
So I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics.
And then, off in a category all by herself, there's Marianne Williamson. Williamson may share the debate stage with other candidates, but otherwise, it's not clear she's even in the same dimension.
And now it is time for a generation of Americans to rise up again. For an amoral economic system has turned short-term profits for huge multinational corporations into a false god. Everything that we're talking about here tonight is what's wrong with American politics. And the Democratic Party needs to understand that we should be the party that talks not just about symptoms, but also about causes. If you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days.
Lisa Booth won't say which of these three options she's voting for to come the primaries, but she's a senior fellow at Independent Women's Voice, and she joins us tonight. So,
can I choose
Lisa,
D, none of the above?
You may have to.
Okay. Yeah.
And that kind of is the tragedy. I mean, presumably there are some non-demented Democrats left out there. I mean, there are, and they don't really have too many options, do they?
They don't, and I thought what was really interesting about last week's debates is I think there's sort of two prevailing themes that are going on right now. One is sort of this directional divide in the party, and then the second is a generational divide. And on the directional front, you showed some of the clips from John Delaney calling out his party. But what we saw on the first night of debates is you had these really radical progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on the stage. And then you had all of these moderates like Tim Ryan, John Delaney, John Hickenlooper as well. And essentially the message from the moderates was, hey, look, we are taking on these policy positions that may play with primary voters, but they don't in the general election. And we see that in polling. Even policy positions like giving health care to illegal immigrants. So Democrat primary voters may favor it by 15 points. But if you look at overall voters, they oppose it by 28 points. And here's a clip from John Hickenlooper talking about this.
This notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans who many of them don't want to give it. Many of them do want to get rid of it, but some don't. Many don't. Or you're going to the Green New Deal, make sure that every American is guaranteed a government job if they want. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
So clearly making that very point of, hey, look, we're going to throw this thing if we're taking on all these radical policy positions that are out of step with the general electorate. And I also thought on the directional front, something that was interesting that surprised me was a lot of the candidates in the second night taking on former President Obama's policy positions, who's still immensely popular with Democrats. I thought that was a really interesting take and really surprised me. And then the second theme I mentioned earlier on the generational front. So you've got Vice President Joe Biden, who's the leading candidate, who's 76 years old. And there was this interesting New York Times article where they interviewed about 50 Democrat insiders, and one of the main concerns was his age and his inability to deliver a crisp message. And we really saw that last week. Take a look at this.
The fact is that the bills that the president, the future president here, that the senator is talking about, if you agree with me, go to Joe 30330 and help me in this fight. Thank you very much.
So just a lot of stumbles there from Joe Biden. I think David Axelrod kind of hit the nail on the head where he said, the good news is for Joe Biden, this is probably the best he can do. And the bad news for Joe Biden is this is probably the best he can do.
So I just want to end on this, inject some reality into this. You are always talking to people who cover politics for a living, right, and to political strategists from both sides. How many people do you know who believe that Joe Biden will actually be the Democratic nominee?
So I think it's sort of split. But here's where things change, and I think where things start looking different. Even if you look ahead at the September poll, or the September debate, rather, the requirements jump significantly. So the field's probably going to be cut in about half of who actually ends up on the debate stage. And what's going to be interesting is a lot of these moderates are not going to be on that debate stage. They're not going to hit the polling requirements or the unique donor requirements as well. And I also think if you're Joe Biden, you're more exposed because you then get follow-up questions from the moderator. There's also more time to speak. So I think the dynamics start changing for him when there's more exposure.
Yeah, time is not on his side on many levels. Lisa Booth, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.